Thanks for having me here. I'm Clas Malmström, and as Martin said, I'm a medical doctor, psychiatrist, and general practitioner, and I actually also have a third medical specialty, and that is rehabilitation. And I was working, when I started working as a psychiatrist, it just happened to be so that I had a lot of patients with burnout syndromes, exhaustion problems, instead of the classical, serious, real psychiatric diseases like schizophrenia, etc. Not that I wasn't interested in those kind of diseases, but you know, you organize a clinic and you share different kinds of jobs, different kinds of chores between you. And I just happened to for 1 year, be responsible for examining and treating those patients with stress-related disorders. And I immediately became aware that most of them had been around the healthcare systems and never been taken care of. Nobody seemed to understand what were their problems, what kind of ill health were they suffering from, what kind of help did they need. So we have a saying in Sweden that they were between all chairs, in no man's land, not getting real help anywhere. So we started doing research on first the causes. What is this really? What are the causes of physical and emotional or psychological exhaustion, and what can we do? What do those patients need in order to be cured and to come back to a functional life and high quality of life and good health? The title of my presentation here, that a good life isn't comfortable, might sound very, very weird at first, but of course it's not. I don't mean that it should be uncomfortable all the time, but what we found is that to maintain a good health, both physically and mentally, you need to take on work, you need to take on efforts, you need to take on challenges, and then recover between the periods when you are working and being stressed and being in the effort zone. So about 50%, if you just look at it time-wise, minutes per hours, hours per day, days per week, etc. It seems to be around 50-50 between having a restful situation and having an effort, having some kind of workload on you, not only feeling that you have to do something, but actually doing something that is exertion, that is a heavy challenge, physically and or mentally. The kind of ill health that is nowadays more or less exploding around the world. Since 2010, 2011, we've seen the prevalence curve of exhaustion, psychological exhaustion and burnout syndrome has absolutely exploded in most countries, not only in Sweden, Northwestern Europe. We see it in most countries. In countries like Sweden, it's more noticeable because we have this problem with tax-paid sick leave. So actually, when we talk about diseases and ill health in Sweden, we are talking about people being on paid sick leave. That's a distortion of the meaning of the statistics. That's why people in other countries don't really understand how we can be so mentally ill because there's more than 60% of all the people on a long-term sick leave are psychologically ill. So in many, when I meet colleagues from other countries who don't know anything about Sweden, they are sincerely curious. Are you going mad, all people in Sweden? 60% of you have, what is it? Is it schizophrenia? And what is it? No, it's psychological exhaustion. Then they understand, or start to understand. But they still don't understand the statistics. But that's of course because of the cost to the society to have a lot of people on sick leave, which you don't have in most countries. It's a very few countries on this planet where you can have a paid sick leave. In most countries, that phenomenon, that kind of insurance, doesn't exist unless you paid for it privately. The kind of ill health that we are talking about here is different from classical diseases and illnesses. And I would like to start going through that concept because it's very, well, I would say it's necessary to understand the difference between pathological ill health, diseases, illnesses, and the modern type of ill health, which is actually a functional kind of disorders and health problems. In both cases, you develop symptoms, negative symptoms physically and or mentally. And we have this view on health that if you have a disturbing symptom, well then you're ill. And most people think that not having any symptom right now means that, well, then I must be in good health because I don't feel anything. As if being anesthetized is the optimal health. Oh, I don't feel anything. I must be very, very healthy. I can't even move a finger. That's a very strange concept when you look closer at it. But that's how most people reason and think about the health, which means that they see it as a dichotomic, as a two-sided phenomenon, that either you are ill or you're not. And if you're not, well, then you must be healthy and have a good life. But in reality, there are two boundaries. There are two border zones on this scale. And we need absolutely to know about them both and understand the mechanisms over these two boundaries, because it's very different kinds of biological mechanisms that rule whether we are on this side or that side of both of these boundaries. The easiest to understand to most people is the left one. And that's the boundary or the border zone into the pathological illnesses. And the red line there delineates pathogenetic processes, which is illness-producing, harmful, influential factors, such as viruses or bacteria or boiling water or poisonous chemicals or too intense kinetic energy getting you a fracture. And our environment is full of potentially harmful, influential factors that if we have a factful knowledge about the world and how it works, and about ourselves and how we function physically and mentally, well, then we can develop what is called preventive competence, which means that in situations that we identify a risk, I can't take how much of that, I have to be careful here, because I have to take some kind of measure. I have to do something to avoid being infected or hurt, damaged by that situation. And the more knowledge we have about potential dangers, about risks that are real risks, not just a rumor, well, the better we develop our preventive competence, and the better we get at keeping ourselves uninjured and not ill, free of classical diseases. We can't protect ourselves from everything, that's impossible. But the more we understand, the more functional our behavioral portfolio develops through the years until we are mature and grown up, the better we can be at responding cleverly to risk situations. And what we are then, we are better at being unill, not injured, not sick. But that doesn't mean that we automatically become healthy and having a good health. After the gym at the hotel this morning, I could see that I don't have epidermatophytes pedis, which means I don't have mushrooms growing between my toes. That's nice, knowing that you don't suffer from that illness. And as a medical doctor, I think I can exclude another 100 illnesses that I'm pretty sure that I don't suffer from right now. Does that mean that I'm automatically happy? Having lots of energy, high quality of life, and a good physical health? Does that come automatically just because I don't have fungi growing between my toes? Or any other of those 200 illnesses that I don't have? No, of course not. So the other boundary is very interesting to look at, because that's the boundary into the good health zone. And good health doesn't come about automatically just by not doing something that is harmful. And that red dot is about health promotive competence. And that's about having factful knowledge about how the world functions and your own needs. What are the necessities that I have to expose myself to ingest, to put in my mouth and swallow, to psychologically expose myself to? What are my needs? What is it that a biological organism must get contact with and get sometimes into itself in order to maintain functional, biochemical, physiological, and in our case, psychological processes? This is not an automatic machine, just we kick it on and get it going when we're born, or at fertilization moment, or anyway. It's not something that goes on automatically until we get ill or injured. We have needs. And if we understand what are the necessities that I have to expose myself to in order to keep healthy processes going, and if you, the more you know about that, the more you can develop promotive competence. But sometimes life gets just too hard, too difficult, of course. So you slide out of the healthy zone and into the mid zone. Now, what is it we have here? Well, we have people who are ill, but they have noticeable negative symptoms from the stomach, from the esophagus, from the muscles, and very often psychological symptoms of something is wrong. So if they go to people like me, a doctor, a physician, and say, "Doctor, I've been feeling bad last week. My stomach is troubling me, and I have this back pain and headache, and actually I have a soul ache too. I'm unhappy. I'm feeling stressed all the time, and I've become cynical." And at that point, most of my colleagues start sweating and finding it difficult to swallow because their throat goes dry. Because then you start to realize that, ooh, I have that kind of patient in front of me. Oh shit, why did the nurse give me that patient? Because most of us, not only surgeons, but most physicians too, we want to have anesthetized patients so we don't have to talk to them. That's much better than having to listen to this crap about feeling tired and cynical. And well, we try to look professional and say, "Oh, I think what's wrong with you," but we have to do some examinations. I will do some of them here right now, and then I'll send you to the lab and to X-ray and to, well, we have a lot of options to send patients away, so we don't have to see them until next week, next month. And then finally, we come to the conclusion that, I have to tell this patient that he's not ill. "What?" says the patient. "But I still have this stomach pain, and my back pain has become worse, and my headache is waking me in the nights now." And not talk about my soul ache, it's become even worse. And as a doctor, you start really being stressed then, because you realize, I have to try to tell the patient what's going on. Well, you're not ill, as I said, because you suffer from a functional disorder. I have a diagnosis code for that too, but it means that I can't help you. We can't help you at the hospital, at the general practitioner's clinic, because you don't have that kind of illnesses that we work with. And functional disorders means that the patient has done too little of something that he would have needed to do more of, exposed himself to more often, or done better. And as a doctor, say I have this patient who is nutritionally into a deficit symptom stadium, and he hasn't moved physically lately, so he's in bad physical shape, and he hasn't taken care of his mental needs, not realizing the necessities for how to get his brain and his mind going on a healthy track. It's just that I can't do it for him. It's no use if I say, well, move over to the window, and I'll see you soon. I'll just go a wonderful walk along the riverside. You can see how it's done. Well, that doesn't help the patient. I can't order in 2 healthy lunches and eat them for him. I have to order 2 and say, that one is for you. Yeah, I know it's not good, all of it, but you need it. So put it in your mouth, chew. No, don't spit out. Swallow, please. because you need to get it inside you. Those chemicals are what you need. We can't do it for him or her. But why is that stressing us doctors? Well, because we are trained for 12, 13, 14, 15 years, we are trained to take care of our patients and execute the treatment for them, on them, even inside them. And in this situation, I can't. There's nothing sick to cut away. Instead, it's a deficit situation. The patient has done too little of something that they needed more of. So, in functional disorders, you are rather unwell. Your well-being has become too low. It's not that you've become ill. And that is extremely hard to explain to some people. They just haven't that kind of view on health issues at all. And we have seen in our research that in some cases, it takes a full year to get a patient convinced that this is how it works and that they actually have to do something on their own. A lot of people get really mad, really angry. I suppose you've seen them walking around even here at Chalmers. Someone looking really disturbed at the moment. Probably they've seen a doctor, being told that they have to do something on their own. I don't have to do that myself. He should do it for me. That's what most people actually think. That until I have a symptom, which means that I'm ill, until then it's okay, I suppose. But that's not how it works. So it's the functional disorders that are in the medical statistics really, really exploding in many countries, not only in Sweden. And it's not uniquely for Sweden either, that it's mostly psychological disorders and mental health issues that is increasing the most. Because the society and not only at work, but also our private situations are very confusing and very difficult for most people to really understand and match against their own needs. So, just to summarize this, you need to have both preventive and promotive competence. I'm not saying that you only need promotive competence and have to start doing more of what your body and your mind needs. I'm also saying that you have to maintain a high preventive competence. And both are getting more and more difficult because of the web. The web is not helping every time you consult it. More and more often, the web is actually giving you disinformation and putting you on the wrong track. And especially young people, teenagers, are very easily tricked and conjured into something that is not along what they actually need. So we shall not forget the preventive side, but I'm not going to talk so much about it. Because the promotive side is an even greater challenge to most of us. But I just want to repeat that you do need to have a certain degree of preventive capacity too, otherwise you lose something, somebody. If if you don't like this picture, I can tell you that we managed to get that lid off and pick up all little chicks and help them down to the pond. So they all survived, but not because of their mother. She was obviously not preventive competent enough to understand what kind of risk she was exposing her chicks to. So I'm not saying that it's easy. Sometimes preventive competence is very complicated, but it actually is, to most people, easier to identify risk in good time and take measurements to avoid it, handle it. So we will spend more time on the possibility side, on the promotive side, because it's uphill. It's easier to slide down into the mid-zone and over the months and years continue sliding all the way into serious pathological disease. That is easier than keep climbing and holding yourself up into the healthy zone. So promotive competence, and the word competence, remember, it's not only theoretical knowledge about human needs and necessities to keep yourself healthy. When you use the word competence, you also mean skills. You have to have a good training in developing the behaviors, the skills that you need to keep yourself up there in good health. It is challenging. And that's why the title is that a good life or a good health is uncomfortable half the time. Because what we've seen in behavioral medical studies of many different kinds by now is that approximately half of the behaviors that we have to execute in order to do this climb and keep ourselves in good health, expose ourselves to our needs, about 50% of those behaviors are sweaty. Uncomfortable, containing some kind of challenge. People often even say that, oh, that's stressing. Oh, I don't like doing that. And if you don't know about this second boundary, if you don't have that view on the health scale at all, well, how do you then react in front of an uphill? How many of you like cycling uphill? How many of you take a ride in the elevator instead of taking the stairs? I walked 9 floors this morning. I was on the 9th floor at the hotel. And when I came up, 2 guys stood there. Are you crazy? No, I'm competent. You see, I have promotive competence. I realized that my legs needed that walk instead of standing in the elevator, being transported. So, any one of you have strong legs? Is there a muscle in there if you touch your thighs? Well, of course there is, but how big is it? How strong is it? How endurable is that muscle? Well, that depends on what you have used those muscles to lately. Not when you were a kid, not 30 years ago or last year, but actually the last weeks determines the status of your thigh muscles or the status of your mental situation right now. It depends on what you have done and not done the last couple of weeks. So I think it's time for just a short break. I don't want you to leave the room, but I would suggest that you stand up and 2 by 2, or 3 by 3 if you prefer that, take a short discussion about promotive initiatives. What have you done too little lately? What do you think that, I would actually feel better and have a better health if I started doing this or that more often? Why not tonight? And even just standing up right now might be a promotive initiative, wouldn't it? And maybe you see someone around who you like. How about giving him or her a hug? Or at least saying, "Hi, I'm glad to see you." Okay, thank you. I can hear your enthusiasm to this kind of... And if you feel that it would be good for you to keep standing, please do. Or if anyone feels like lying down, because I really need that, please do that. We need good habits. We need a lot of healthy habits. But we can clearly see during the last about 2 decades, 20 years, that it's not enough. We can't trust our instincts anymore. We can't trust our feelings, emotions anymore. And we just don't develop enough good habits. We have to increase the knowledge level, the awareness level of the necessities, the needs that we have to expose ourselves to. And that's one of the reasons why the concept of positive stress has evolved through the stress research over the world. By that we mean that it's a stressful situation, it's a challenging situation that activates our stress system. And by the way, the stress system that is built into us biologically, psychophysiologically, is a helping system. Many people think that it's just a harming system. It's actually a life necessity to have this stress system. And the stress hormones and the stress neurological reactions that occur in our bodies and in our brains and minds are meant to be helpful, which they also are. About 999, or maybe even 9,999 of 10,000 stress reactions are positive, meaning that they actually are helpful. And a lot of us stress researchers would really like to just take away the word stress because it's become so negative in its associations. What it is, the stress system, it is a resource developing or resource activating system. The system that knows that we have all kinds of sleeping resources, physically and mentally. And it's the job that the stress system is meant to do is to awaken, to activate different resources in front of different kinds of challenges. When you feel that, ooh, I can't handle this situation with both hands in my pockets, well, then it's the stress system that helps you take your hands out and activate that kind of resource, that kind of capacity. And in front of those kinds of challenges, where you realize that I need to do that, but I don't like it. It's boring, it's sweaty, it's difficult, it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable, and I don't like it. Well, in that situation, you need your stress system to activate and heighten your motivation, getting you over the threshold and just start doing it because you need it, even if you don't like it. The other 50% of the behaviors that we need to execute in order to expose ourselves to influential factors that we need, the other 50% mean that the reward comes instantly, without any kind of effort. There's no threshold. You just realize, oh, I need that, and I want it, and it's easy to execute the behavior that gives you that reward, that wished for effect. But remember that a big part, about 50% of the human behaviors that are health promotive are associated with a threshold, with some kind of challenge, that you have to activate your stress system in order to take on an effort. If that is climbing a stairs or cycling up hills or taking that embarrassing and stressing challenge to talk to your friend about what happened yesterday that has been nagging you since then, or well, whatever it is, it's very often based on yourself realizing that I see a potential. There's a possibility for me to do something that will be good for me, to promote my health and my well-being. But I don't like it. But if you have identified the potential, I think this could be good for me. At least I want to experiment and check it out. But if you are a coward in terms that you have learned that everything that is boring, sweaty, taking on some kind of exertion, some kind of work, some kind of discomfort, physically and especially psychologically. Why I'm also saying boring, because to a lot of people, boring challenges are the worst. And if you don't have the courage to take that challenge on and try to handle it, well, then you will start to develop a deficit of some kind. Biologically, biochemically, physiologically, or psychologically. And that's why in the modern behavioral medicine we actually talk a lot about, and many studies are designed to try to investigate further, how can we handle this challenge and this kind of positive stress that is necessary for us in order to keep up a good health. And most of those behaviors, once you've learned them, once you've practiced them a couple of times, or sometimes even more than a couple of times, sometimes it takes 20, 30 repetitions until you feel that, now that's a good habit. I don't hesitate. I know that's good for me, so I just take it on. But until you reach that stage, you have to convince yourself each time that, I know that potential. I want to realize it, to try to bring it on, even if it's uncomfortable. So to go further into the concept of positive stress, I would like to go back to the balance concept that Deborah talked about before, and it has a weakness, the concept work-life balance, because that's not really what it's about. It's not that if you're not working, everything is all right. To a lot of people, being at work is the only place and the only situation that they enjoy. And the whole private situation is a mess and much more stressful than the work situation. So some people are tricked and duped into looking in the wrong direction. That's one of the causes why we have this enormous problem in Sweden with people on sick leave, because we always blame work. Oh, it must be your job, it must be the workplace that is dysfunctional. But that's not true. It sometimes is, of course. I'm not saying that it never is, but it doesn't help in solving a problematic situation just to take for granted that it's always the work situation that is causing exhaustion and burnout and other psychological stress-related issues. Going back to the stress system, the resource mobilization system, most people think that it's an on-off system, that either you are stressed or you're not. And being not stressed is okay. But it isn't that simple. Actually, in the concept of positive stress, which I was a member of those 700 stress researchers that in San Diego 1994 defined what positive stress should be defined as in the conditions for using that term in stress research from that day on made it a lot more difficult than before, because we decided to define positive stress as not only handling a challenging situation in a practical and functional manner, meaning that your stress system reacted, but reacted right, and put you in just that mobilizational situation that you need in order to handle this situation. But that's not enough. You also have to, after the stressful situation, after the effort, you have to make sure that qualitative recovery is occurring and bringing you back biologically and psychologically to an energy level, a resource level, which means that you are within some hours a day ready to take on that kind of effort again. Because the resources that are needed are reinstalled, are recovered. And the system, the physiological system, which is driving these recovery processes, is called the anabolic system in biological terms. I suppose you've all heard of anabolic steroids being used as doping means for some elite athletes. Well, at least it has been. We have developed much better detection methods nowadays, so they can't use it within 2 or 3 months before a competition. And that's also why we have these doping checks between the championships, and unannounced they can visit a licensed elite athlete anytime, and they just have to tell him or her 2 days before that they are coming, and he or she has to notify where he is and be ready for the test. But anabolic steroids have been famous for making you stronger. And most people think that, oh, if I just get an injection of anabolic steroids or take that capsule and I get a higher level of testosterone or another kind of anabolic steroid, I will get stronger and faster. That's not how it works. The anabolic hormones, including testosterone and estrogen and all the other 19 known anabolic hormones, what they do is that they drive the recovery processes. They don't make you stronger, they don't make you faster just by achieving a higher serum level. What they do is that they make your recovery processes even more efficient. So the effect that the athletes who took steroid doping before could develop is that they could take on one extra training pass per day without getting injured. Because thanks to the anabolic steroid, their recovery processes were on turbo. So they could recover quicker than the other. And which meant that they could take on even harder training, even more intense workout sessions compared to what their competitors could. And that on just a 3-4 months period, that made an enormous difference in capacity. So we have both these systems that have to cooperate and work in synchrony. So after taking on a challenging situation and going into some kind of effort, some kind of work, those organs, those tissues, those parts of your body that have become tired from that effort, they have now to be taken over by the anabolic system, and the recovery process is driven by hormones and nervous signals until the resources are back on the level that obviously is needed. And the anabolical system is constantly reading the situation all over the body and immediately identifying tired, worn out structures. And for instance, if the elevator is broken and you have to walk the stairs instead of taking the elevators and you live on 8th or 9th floor, what do you think will happen after a couple of weeks? Well, you will have a noticeable increase in strength in your legs. And even after the second time you take the stairs, within a couple of days, you walk the stairs maybe 2 or 3 times. One of the machinists in the anabolic system will lift the telephone and call up the legs and say, hey, left leg, are you there? Yeah. What's the matter? Yeah, I'm just talking to the right leg about that. We said, what's happening? He's used us 2 days in a row, walking up all those stairs. It's crazy. Yeah, I noticed that, says the anabolic system. Shall I send you some more resources tonight? Yes, please do. Build us up. Because it looks like a trend. He's already walked 3 times in the stairs. And that's how it works. If it seems to be a trend, it seems to be repeated, well, then the anabolic system reacts and starts building up even stronger, even better resources in those parts of the body that have been tested, that have been used and exposed to some kind of heavy effort. So these two systems have to work in synchrony. And we change our bodies in mathematical terms. We change body every 3rd week. But of course, the plastic cycle is very different between different tissues. Some of our blood cells and the intestinal mucosa is exchanged within 24 hours. Some of our granulocytes, the leukocytes, mast cells, macrophages, and the intestinal mucosa, they only live for one day, 24 hours. Then they are exchanged and new cells are developed from secondary stem cells. Other organs, like the skeleton, is rebuilt also, but it takes several months to rebuild a bone in your arms or legs or back or whatever. But if you just take all different tissues, all organs, and put them all together in a mathematical equation, you can see that we change our bodies every third week. So if you haven't looked yourself in the mirror the last 3 weeks, you might wonder, am I going to recognize me? I have a new face since I last looked in the mirror. Most people do look more often than every third week. But the most classical example is the skin, which we all know, if we have some kind of biological education, is growing from the deep side outwards, and when they start reaching the surface, the skin cells die off, get into squamous cells, which are dead skin cells, and they are eventually, after a few days, they are just wiped off. And it doesn't have to be a mechanical process that just fall off, even if we don't use that part of the skin. But if we use the skin, for instance, palms of your hands or soles of your feet, well, this time of the year, most of you will have very thin skin on the soles of your feet. But in a few months, believe it or not, it might be summer. You're never sure on these on these latitudes. But those of us who like to go barefoot in the summer, we know that end of May, beginning of June, it's pretty sore, and you have to avoid some surfaces because, ooh, it's just too painful. But if you keep going, after midsummer, you can go anywhere, because then you have developed 3-4 millimeters thicker skin under your feet. And the same with your hands. If you often use your hand taking on thin loads and really challenging the skin, then you develop calluses where it's most needed. Working in the garden, digging or whatever you do, if you do it without gloves, after a while you notice, wow, my skin is getting thicker and thicker, and I can keep digging for 4 hours without gloves and not developing blisters and bloodshed. And that's because the anabolical system is reacting to what is going on and what seems to be a trend. Is it going to happen again? Yeah, probably, because it's already happened 3 times the last couple of days. Okay, then, let's strengthen that part of the body, make it ready for even tougher challenges. The same principle goes for all of our organs, all tissues. In some organs, like the brain and muscles and some of our blood cells, the lymphocytes, they are not exchanged on a whole cell basis. The cell in those tissues have the same lifetime as the whole body. We can't exchange those cells, but we do exchange all the organelles and all the constituents in the cytoplasm, etc. But if one of those cells would happen to die, it can't be exchanged with the new cell taking on its role, not easily anyhow, because those cells learn specific things, and they have to survive all the way to the coffin. But nevertheless, it's good to know about the plasticity principle, which means that in order to maintain a healthy body, which is ready to take on efforts, to take on work, to take on heavy loads. You have to take on heavily. You have to do those things. You have to step into those situations, take on the challenge and do it. Even if it's heavy, even if it's stressful, even if it's sweaty. But then you have to trust your anabolical system that it will restore those resources that were burnt, used, emptied when you were in the work situation. And if this circle works, if the if the coordination between those two systems works, well, then you can keep up a healthy body. And the same principle goes for the mind. In order to be mentally strong, you have to step into situations that are stressful, that are psychologically difficult, and slowly develop a skill to handle those kinds of challenges, even if it's hard work mentally. But you will only be able to do that if, after each hard session, you can trust that your recovery is actually taking over and functioning. And this kind of balance, this kind of concept of the balancing act is slightly different than the work-life concept, because this looks at 24/7. The whole life situation. It's not only at work that you put on efforts and do stressing things. You also have in your private life. You have a family, you have an economy, you have 3 ex-husbands or wives, and a very weird neighbor. Wonder if he's sane. And, well, you never know what happens in your surroundings, in the environment that you have to handle. It's not necessary at work. It could be anywhere in your life situation that you get stressed and tested by really difficult situations. So this model is a little different from the classical work-life balance. I don't mean by that the workplaces should just breathe out and say, oh, so we have no responsibility. Of course, you do have a very heavy and important responsibility to create workplaces with a culture and with a psychosocial and, of course, even physical milieu that is human, that is able to handle for us human beings. But then it lies upon ourselves as individuals to take responsibility for our private situation. When I'm not at work, when I'm not even thinking about my work, well, that doesn't mean that everything is okay and couldn't be stressful. To some people, it's as I said, it's more stressful to be at home than at work. So this balancing act is not easy to maintain. Nobody is saying that it's easy. And it's getting more and more complicated. And actually the difficulty is rising not because of quantitative challenges. Instead, what we can see is that it's qualitative, stressful challenges that is rising. I mean, it's not that we are shutting down all the elevators and not allowing people to use their cars or bicycles and forcing us to go back into old times, heavy physical work every day. And it's not that our workplaces are getting physically more and more heavy and difficult to handle. It is in the psychosocial domain that the difficulties are increasing. And that's why I say it's a qualitative increase in stress risk situations in life, not only at work. But in order to maintain this balance, you have to, of course, have respect for situations in life, at workplace and at home, in your private life, when the situation just gets not handleable. You can't keep it up. If you're feeling insufficient, insecure, it's hopeless. I can't handle this situation. What shall I do? Sometimes it's just too much. But more and more often we see that it's not too much, but too difficult, too complicated, too difficult to understand. How does it work? What can I do? Where can I get help? So if any one of you never has been in a life situation where one or two of these feelings are coming up, well, then you are unique, because it's very, very common. It happens to most of us, if not all, sooner or later. At some point in life, it's getting difficult. If you, on top of that, have one or two or even three of these so-called stress sensitivity factors, which are internal cognitive patterns of thinking, of how you interpret different kinds of situations, which makes you more sensitive to stress and more sensitive to developing a negative stress reaction. And for instance, we have people who are abnormally afraid of losing control. What they actually suffer from, if you look at it from a functional psychological point of view, is intolerance to uncertainty. And the controlling behaviors that they have developed is just a futile try to get back the feeling of certainty. Oh, now I have control for a few seconds. And then we don't have control anymore. So in worst case scenario, some people who are really suffering from this, they have to check different things, control different aspects of life every minute. Some of them do it a couple of times per minute. Say, where are my kids? How are they doing? What is my colleague doing? Is he doing his work as he should? Am I getting that? Where's my package? It should have come with the post yesterday. I have to control. Where is it? What's wrong? Etc. 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 And that kind of complexity in life is just increasing. We have special programs, of course, special psychotherapeutical programs, how to handle this and learn those people to be better at handling uncertainty and not being dependent on control-seeking behaviors, which create a lot of unnecessary stress. And then we have this modern phenomenon, at least it seems to be a phenomenon that has not appeared from nothing, but increased by 500 or 600% during the last 30 years, and that is the aversion of discomfort. People who actively avoid to do things that are uncomfortable, that are disconcerting, that are boring, or in some other way creating a feeling of discomfort. And that aversion has increased, as I said, 500 or 600% since about 1990, when we started measuring that in the population. And you can for yourself imagine what that does to their premotive competence. They mistake an uphill for something negative that should be avoided. So they actually avoid doing things that should have been good for them because they are driven by the aversion towards discomfort. Irritability, if it's even worse, we call it aggression, or passive aggression. But a lot of people go around being irritated, several minutes per hour, several hours per day, irritated over something. Could be how our politicians are acting, what's happening at the workplace, what's happening in our bostadsrättsförening, or some other aspect of life that is irritating. And if you get stuck in that mental state, it means that you have a continuous or nearly continuous stress reaction going on inside yourself. Because the stress system is constructed that way. If you're irritated, almost aggressive, almost angry at something, well then something must be wrong and your stress system gets activated. What shall we do? We must do something about it. But if we don't do anything about it, we can't do anything about it, just keeping ourselves irritated and becoming even more irritated at the next, oh, that bloody idiot. Are we going to have a meeting? Oh, no, not with those. Oh. So irritation leads to new irritation, leads to a higher risk of being irritated at the next situation too. And it really wears out a lot of people because they are constantly in even if it's a low degree, it is a constant stress reaction. And then we have different kinds of symptoms of or cognitive effects of having a so-called low self-esteem. In Swedish it's called a very strange thing. It's called självkänsla. But the English term is much better. Self-esteem is what it's actually about. And it's a psychological mechanism that is constantly going on inside our brain or in our mind. And it's about how we interpret ourselves, how we value ourselves and what we do and don't and what we manage and what we handle cleverly and skillfully and if it works, if this mechanism works, it gives us a feeling that yeah, well, I'm good at something, I'm valuable, I'm actually helping in this situation and that, and I'm taking care of my children, and I'm doing a good job, and etc., etc. But if you have a distorted self-esteem mechanism, you kind of create qualifications that are almost impossible to maintain, that you have to be over an 8 out of 10 possible on all kinds of level in life. Otherwise, you're not a good person. So you have to be a fantastic mother or father, fantastic at work, a fantastic coach for your children's football team and your daughter's volleyball team, and you have to be an excellent lawnmower, never having a single yellow flower in your lawn, and you have to keep, the fence is getting rotten there, I have to fix it immediately. And if you have that view on life and yourself, of course you can't keep that up. But it can also take other, what I'm describing now is the perfectionist problem. That unless I'm over that level, unless I'm performing over that level, I'm no good. I'm not worth respect, not even self-respect. And the perfectionists, they're never satisfied. They don't have a good enough level. They always have to be better than good enough. There is no good enough to them. They just have to. And those who are worst affected is those who are afraid of making a mistake. So they check their texts 3-4 times, looking for some kind of bad formulation, grammatical error or spelling error or something. Prestige is also a symptom of a dysfunctional self-esteem process. And that is quite different from perfectionism. When you have developed a prestigious self-defense against low self-esteem, then you actually want to deny your own weaknesses by trying to trick both yourself and others, but primarily yourself, that I'm good. Not perfect, maybe, but I'm very good. I'm worth admiring, even. And if you have that prestigious attitude towards life, you become very, very vulnerable. Because other people can. If you work with somebody who is a prestigious person, it takes a few weeks, and then you just see through their mask, see through their shining facade, and if you want to, you can just puncture them very easy, which is extremely stressful to them, because then they feel that they lose their self-esteem. That's why they try by all means to keep up their shining facade. And it's not primarily other people they're trying to conceive, that they are actually trying to trick themselves in first place. Dysautonomy is maybe a strange word to you. It's a psychological term for having difficulties attaining close relationships. You don't dare to show yourself to others. So you keep a distance. You never dare to get really close to someone and show yourself inside out with all your faults, letting people know who you really are, what you can and cannot, and is good at and not so good at. If you have a dysautonomy, if you are a dysautonomous person, you always keep distance. You can function very well in groups and be very social and a very positive person, but on a two-person level, you get uncomfortable, and you don't want others to really know you and look into you. So they are poor people in that sense, that they never develop close friendships, close relationships. They always try to hide part of themselves to everybody else. And it also means that they hate confrontations, because challenging another person, taking a confrontation, is showing yourself and getting close. So a dysautonomous person always says, yes, yeah, sure, put it here on my desk, I can do it. When they mean no, they say yes. And then they regret it afterwards. Why did I say yes? I did. I knew already that I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I wanted to do something else tonight. And now I'm sitting here at work. Why did I say yes? Because in the situation when you should have negotiated, the discomfort you feel towards confronting another person is so intense that you let yourself down and say, okay, yes, because I can't say no. those people are the favorites in the souk in Arabic countries. I don't know if you've been to North Africa or Arabic countries and visited the Medina, the souk, where they try to sell mats, and baskets and shoes and jewelry to you for ridiculous prices. It's so expensive that you just don't understand. How dare you say that mat is not worth 7,000 euros? That's ridiculous. But they don't mean it. They just want to start a negotiation. But if you are this autonomous person, you don't want to negotiate. So that's one of the lessons we always give, one of the tasks we always give to those patients. They are sent out to a shopping mall to buy shoes and negotiate the price. And most Swedish people, no. There's a price tag. I pay what it says. No, you're not. You're taking those shoes, you go to the cashier or find some staff and you say, I want these shoes, but I'm not ready to pay that price. That's a very simple, that's the first step, autonomy lecture. Externalization is another psychological term. It means that you always blame others. You always blame circumstances. You always blame something outside yourself. You can't see how you yourself should have done, and you can't read the consequences of your own behaviors. So you always blame somebody else or just the circumstances. And that also means that you are often, very often stressed internally because you, without knowing it, without wanting it, without consciously willing it, you create stressful situations around you, letting other people down, blaming other people for causing effects that you caused, but you don't see it, you don't recognize it, and you definitely don't want to hear about it. So you end up in conflicts and bad, sour relationships. And then we have restlessness. And that's one of the clues, one of the important clues to understand why this is so important on an individual level to manage to handle stress. Because if you are mentally restless and always feeling that, oh, I need something to do, sitting down, taking it easy, listening to music, reading poetry, you're crazy. Oh, no. I can always clean the bathroom or go back to work or work from home or taking care of that chore or that chore. I don't want to sit down and doing nothing. No. Let's move on. And some people have developed that kind of mental restlessness into real heights, which means they never rest. Some of those patients tell me, I don't go to sleep, I fall to sleep. I don't go to sleep until I collapse. Because lying down in bed, doing nothing, that's definitely a very good way never to go to sleep. Because I get so stressed by doing nothing. I start thinking of all the things I'm not doing by lying here. But you are trying to do something, you're trying to fall asleep. Yeah, but do you think I can fall asleep when I'm thinking about all the things I'm not doing? No, of course not. So insomnia or other kinds of sleep disorders, sleep disturbances are very, very common in this group. Which means that they are, just like all the others in this list and in this list, they are suffering from a almost continuous state of mind, which means that they are at unease, some kind of mental tension. It doesn't have to be very intense. I'm not talking about anxiety. I'm not talking about clinical anxiety levels. Far from it. It's just that they are in a state of unrest. They are not in a peaceful, harmonic, mental state of mind. They are at some kind of low-level stress, some kind of tension, which of course means that they are leaking energy in vain, which is sometimes a real problem. But what is even worse is that they are sabotaging their own recovery, because the anabolic system that I was talking about a few minutes ago is conditioned. It's constructed in a very, to us, modern people, very weird way. But if you see it from a biological, evolutionary point of view, it's self-obvious why it's constructed that way. The anabolic system cannot activate itself and order really intense recovery processes in the body, in the brain, or in the mind, unless you first have achieved to put yourself in a peaceful, relaxed state of mind. So you can't be restless. You can't be at unease. You can't think about things that you haven't done, or maybe I forgot, or maybe maybe I forgot that, or and anything else that is. It doesn't have to be worrying, but it's still something that is occupying your mind and blocking coming down to a peaceful, harmonic, resting state of mind. And it's not until then that the anabolic system can put on a qualitative recovery process in your body and in your brain and in your mind. So what this situation creates is an insufficient recovery. And this picture is lying, because if you remember, the yellow was performance, was all those activities that use up resources and energy, while the green is recovery, the debit side, where you charge yourself with new energy. This image is lying. You can be in this state of in a biological state of unbalance for a few minutes only. Then it's the lower side that defines both sides, the level on both sides. So exhaustion is actually not caused by overexertion. The biological problem and the psychological problem behind all those terrible symptoms that you develop if you end up in a real burnout or exhaustion situation is caused by the anabolic dysfunctions. So this image, the previous image is lying. You can't maintain your performance capacity if your recovery processes, if your anabolic processes are lower down. The other side will, within hours, come down to the level that the recovery processes allow. So it's even within the same day, but definitely until next day, you can notice if your recovery has not been good enough, quantitatively and or qualitatively, you will not be able to perform the next day, this level will be noticeable. I can't do what I want to do. I just haven't got the energy. I haven't got the urge. I haven't got the stamina. I can't even think normally. I can't count. I'm so tired. But you can come back, and if those who have come back from a serious burnout or exhaustion, they have done it through putting on small steps, and every second step has to be on each side. You can never take 2 steps on the same side. You have to take every second step on each side. So every time you increase the workload you put on, the recovery system, the anabolical processes have to come up to at least the same level. And that, if any one of you have torn an Achilles tendon or another muscle or tendon, you know how hard it is to rehabilitate that. But it's fully possible, and you can come back from an Achilles rupture within 18 months if every day from 7th or 8th week you start using that muscle carefully at first, and being really, really careful to notice that if the recovery is coming up, then you can start using that foot and that leg even more. And if the recovery, if the building up processes are coming along, then you can increase next day a little more, and the next week a little more. But the definition of the rehabilitation process is the anabolical side of the process. If the recovery from the latest effort isn't being done properly, next time you try to train that muscle, it will break again, and you have to start from zero. So what you have to be careful with is not the workload, the effort. It's making sure that your recovery is functioning. And if it is, then you can reach a new balancing act on high level. And not only stress researchers, also quality of life research and happiness research and good health research around the world we really have a consensus during the last, I would say, 10 years. We are agreeing on the point that this image is representing a good life, a high quality of life, and a good health. And it is maintained by a very offensive, a very active stress management competence, being skillful on both sides, taking on challenges and efforts that are meaningful and important, and knowing that you can trust your recovery processes in between the rounds. And I just want to underline and stress again that I don't mean that the situation at the workplace is unimportant. Of course it isn't. And we have to look at that too. And together, if you actually are working together, you have to ask yourselves, how are we doing at work? What aspects of our work situation can we work with and change to the better? What is dependent on ourselves? What is possible for us to actually influence? And sometimes if you start talking that way, what are the possibilities for us to create a really good workplace, the best possible work environmental influential situation that we can, which is within the possible reaches? If you start talking about it and trying to use your brilliant minds to look at that challenge together, you will discover that there are loads of things that you can do on your own and together to create a better workplace. But then somebody said, "Oh, but the circumstances, all these rules and regulations and all these strange things that comes from raining down from the top and from authorities and regulative institutions." Well, this is actually a qualitative, stressful challenge in modern workplaces, and not the least in big organizations and in public institutions and organizations. This is the worst. In private companies, especially at small workplaces, small companies, this challenge is not as obvious and not as troublesome. But in big organizations, you're actually drowning in bureaucracy. This is like walking around with bureaucratic mud up to your knees. And that's, if you try to go wading in mud up to your knees, that's really hard work. And that's exactly what it is working in a modern institution. Because nobody can process or live according to 127 policies and rules and regulations and goals and other bureaucratic rubbish. So one of those things that you have to do together with your colleagues in your team at your workplace is deciding how shall we handle this? Because we can't live up to them all. We can't even read them all. I have a colleague who got fed up with working in Swedish healthcare, at least clinically, for a few years. So she's working on her PhD actually now in Stockholm, and I think it was in October or November 22 that she had a preliminary report at SKR, Swedish. A very weird organization, an overhead organization for communes and regions in Sweden. And she had looked into all the policies and regulations and bureaucratic documents that you are supposed to live by and obey while you are working at Swedish hospitals and general practitioners' clinics. She had found 3,765. And she was working on it full time, but she hadn't had the time in 2 years to read them all. So how the hell should I, as a practicing doctor, having patients in between the documents, how do you think I should have time to read all those? There's no chance. Then I would have to spend 2 years full time. No patience. I have lots of documents to read. That's an impossible situation. And of course, the bureaucrats at SKR, their natural impulse, what do you think that is? Oh, this is really weird. We have to create another document instructing people how to handle this. And even the politicians thinking the same time. Oh yes, we have to sharpen the laws. We have to do something about the regulations. So we have to, if we're interested in the operation at the workplace, what is this workplace about? What's the mission? What's the meaning with working? Is that what we are supposed to create? That kind of value? Well, then we should actually prioritize that, shouldn't we? And then we have to help each other to fold up the umbrella and protect ourselves and each other from at least a part of this rubbish. And decide together, how are we going to prioritize? What are we going to care about? Which regulations and instructions and policies and all the other stuff, what are we actually going to try to live up to? At the same time as we are doing our job, what the job is really about. And you can't do that on your own, you have to do it together. And in order to have a functional and stress-tolerant work group, you have to have a certain level of competence. And I would like to stress the skill in that concept, not only the theoretical educational background and being a knowledgeable person. You also have to be skillful, trained, having experience to practice. And you have to be very careful to think about your own motivation. Why am I here? What does it mean to me to work here? What is really my reason to be here? How did you end up here this afternoon? Somebody pushed you? Were you carried here? Any one of you being here involuntarily? So you made it on your own. Well, did you really want to? Or is it because your professor expected you to come? Or what the hell made you come here? Well, some kind of motivation. And very often we don't really think about our motivational why am I doing this? Why am I here? And that's a good question to ask your colleagues and yourself. Next time you have some kind of team meeting, just put the question, why are we here? What's this about? What does it mean to us? Not as a provocation, but as a gentle and very, very carefully studied challenge to clear out with yourself, what is my motive? Why am I here? What does it mean to me? Because if you're unclear on that, you are very easily stressed by all kinds of challenges in every corner. And then you have, as I said a few minutes ago, you have to decide together with your colleagues, how are we going to prioritize? What is important? What is so important that we're actually going to do it? And what is not important enough for us to do it? So we should decide together and specify together, what are we not doing? At least today, or this week, or this month, or in some cases, ever. But you have to do that together with your colleagues, with the team that you're actually working with. Focus and concentration depends on the prioritization. If you don't have a clever prioritization, which is realistic, then you don't know what to focus on, how to concentrate. Some people have problems with that in itself and need to actually practice and train their own focusing and concentration capacity. But in a team level, it's dependent on that you have prioritized in a clever way, and then helping each other to focus on what you have prioritized up on the important side of the bar. Which means that in order to be focused, you have to be brave enough to give each other feedback, to remind each other. I think you are doing something that we shouldn't do now, or whatever kind of feedback you feel that you have to give or need to give a colleague. That's a sign of a well-functioning group, if you can give each other feedback. Not only positive and encouraging feedback, but also correcting and negative feedback, which might be wrong, but at least you can start discussing, why did I feel that way? Why did I interpret what you were doing that way? So feedback, even if it's negative, is always improving the group function if you talk to each other afterwards. And that's a kind of courage that you have to maintain socially, to communicate, to give each other feedback. But you also have to have the courage in the group to take on the tasks and the chores that are boring. And even if they are stressing, but you know that they are important, you have to do it. And then in the group you have to discuss, how are we going to share these boring or very difficult, very hard tasks between us, so they don't end up on one of you all the time, but are shared in a clever way, depending on what competence you have, but also depending on some kind of fairness, sharing the easy, boring burden between you in a fair way is very important to maintain a good team spirit. And we've already talked about the sixth point here, energy. To maintain energy is what I was talking about before, about making sure that your recovery processes are functioning. And some part of our recovery is being carried out at work, while other parts of our recovery is only carried out when we are sleeping and having a good sleeping architecture, spending hours in different kinds of deep sleep. And other kinds of energy restoring is only done when you are in activities that you like, that you love, that are inspirational, that are wonderful to you yourself to be engaged in, because you're getting so inspired by them and love being in that action, in that activity. Now we're going to have a break, half an hour, and I would like to challenge you to have a nice coffee break, of course, talk about something else for a while, but then go together with one or maybe two of your closest colleagues, people that you're really actually working together with or cooperating with often, that you are dependent on in if not your daily work, so at least often. And start discussing these three, help each other to penetrate these three questions. First, if you dare, share with each other, which do I think are my strengths and which do I think are my weaknesses, and see if you agree. Maybe your colleague has another picture of you than you have yourself. And then discuss with each other, what can you possibly do about that kind of weakness? How can you strengthen that? And try to develop a better skill to handle that kind of situations, to develop something that you're not good at into something that you're better at. And, the third, which is very important, also specify in detail how are we going to help each other follow up and evaluate this or those few experiments that I and you decided that we are going to try, each one on your own or together. But how are we going and when are we going to follow up on this and evaluate the effects? And there's lots of research that have shown that if you don't follow up, you just wet the sand for a while and there will be no effect. So the follow-up and the communal evaluation is extremely important for this kind of experiments. Okay, see you in half an hour. Thanks.